Papa Murphy's $7.99 everyday value lineup of take and bake pizzas are, well, a pretty big deal for a pretty small price. We're talking big savings on big flavors, like our new bold shredded pepperoni pizza, crumbled sausage pizza, or classic cheese pizza, all for the small price of $7.99 each. So head to Papa Murphy's, because with freshly made large pizzas at this price, you can afford to bake a big-time deliciousness all day, every day. Papa Murphy's, change the way you pizza.
This is a Queen Bee Radio High School sports presentation.
It's time for another edition of the Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie Chien High School Football Roundup on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Level 2 playoffs are complete on the Wisconsin side, and we have the sectional championship round for 11-player football and the state semifinal game coming up for the Highland Cardinals in 8-player football. We also have Galena Pirates football coming up in the second round of the IHSA Class 1A football playoffs. We'll talk about that during our show today. On our show, we have a Galena truther, Steve Prestegard, with us, as well as Mark Evenstad and Gary Craugh. That's our lineup. Make sure to check out the Papa Murphy's $7.99 everyday value lineup. It's a great deal for a small price. We're talking large pizza with new shredded pepperoni, crumbled sausage, or classic cheese for $7.99 each, which means you can afford big-time deliciousness at Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie Chien. That deal ends on November 12th. Let's start off with 8-player football as the Highland Cardinals have advanced to the state semifinal round with their win over North Crawford on Friday night, 35-0. A second matchup with North Crawford, a dominant win against North Crawford. And Gary Craugh, you were on the call of that game over on ESPN Radio, AM 1590 WPVL. I was kind of curious to see how Highland would play in this rematch with North Crawford because it was a very tight matchup the first time that those two teams played. But Highland looked like they asserted their dominance and flexed their muscle and showed that they are truly one of the top teams in 8-player football. Talk about the matchup from Friday night.
Yeah, when the game first started, North Crawford took the opening kickoff, 3 plays, they were out. And about the only time that Highland was stopped was on their initial drive. 3 plays and out. After that, Highland pretty much did what Highland wanted to do. Bennett Smith had 2 really nice touch passes, long passes. One, I believe, was 44 yards. Another one was 55 yards to Wes Kreisinger for touchdowns. And the running game for the Cardinals was also good. Washa had several nice runs, and it was pretty much dominated by Highland. They the defensive and offensive line, what there is, pretty much controlled the tempo. They had huge holes and a lot of for the running backs, and a lot of time for Bennett Smith to pass. It was there was really no question in the contest as to who was the dominant team.
Yeah, Highland certainly looking the part. As you mentioned, Bennett Smith passing on the game, 8 of 13 for 173 yards, those 2 touchdown passes. Did throw an interception, and the running game, 171 total rushing yards combined. When you look at the defensive stats, this is very impressive. Jackson McGuire and Wes Kreisinger both with over 15 total tackles on the game. So they were a dominant presence for the Cardinals, and they get a second win against the North Crawford Trojans, which sets them up for a matchup against Owen Withy at Stanley Boyd. We'll have that game on Extreme 1071 and x1071.com. Full disclosure, we did reach out to Stanley Boyd about us potentially streaming the game on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. There are not adequate resources or accommodations for us to be able to pull that stream off, so our apologies. We tried. We aren't able to do that, unfortunately. And as it relates to the game on Friday night, by definition, it is a neutral site game. Geographically speaking, it is not really a neutral site game, as the Highland Cardinals have to travel 3 hours and 9 minutes according to Google Maps, and that's assuming the bus can go at full speed and, abide by the speed limits on those rural roads on the way up there. As for Owen Withy, they have a 20-minute drive to Stanley Boyd. So, again, a bit of a home field advantage, or really a true home field advantage for Owen Withy, and for Highland, a very long bus trip. They're leaving Highland, I believe, at 10:30 in the morning on Friday to make it up to Owen Withy for a 7 o'clock kickoff, which means it's going to be a very long bus ride back, especially if the Cardinals don't come away with the win. But either way, still a very impressive matchup. Both teams ranked 1 and 2 in the final with Sports.net. Coaches poll. So Gary and then Steve, since you both will be on the coverage. Gary, what's the thing you're looking forward to the most with this matchup between Cardinals and Owen Withy?
The biggest thing I'm going to look for is the Highland defense to try and shut down that offense of Owen Withy. 10 games they've had this year, Owen Withy, 5 shutouts, and they've averaged 55.6 points per game while giving up less than 10 points a contest in the 5 games that teams did score. They don't pass a lot, Owen Withy doesn't. Statistically, they've had 9 passes the entire year. Their top running back, Mason Gay, just short of 1,400 yards, but they've got several running backs that are in the 300, 400, 500 yard category on the season. So it's going to be interesting to see how Highland tries to slow this thing down. I mean, it's statistically, it's going to be a mammoth job.
Well, it is going to be a mammoth job, but on the other hand, I think I question, it'll be interesting to see if Owen Withy's ever seen a team like Highland this season, a team that can move the ball on the ground and in the air. I believe the forecast is good for Friday night. Weather's not going to be an issue, even though we're closer to the North Pole than the equator up there, I believe. But, you look at Highland's athletes. My question is, has Owen Withy seen anybody like those guys, a quarterback like Highland has or receivers like Highland has? And the thing that is always interesting with a game like that is, okay, so they've only thrown the ball 9 times. Obviously, they haven't needed to throw the ball, and they're 10-0. What happens if they do need to throw the ball? What if Highland gets up a couple of scores and the game starts getting late? A team that can, and I understand for almost everybody in high school football, rushing the football is the first priority. But you have to be able, I think it's pretty obvious, you have to be able to pass it when you need to pass it. And I've found over the years that teams that don't pass when maybe they don't necessarily have to often find they can't pass when they do have to. So that right there, if Highland falls behind, they've got the pass as the option. Stanley Boyd, I don't know, 9 passes in the entire season. That's like less than 1 a game. And we'll see if that ends up being a huge factor.
And I think too, with you brought up a great point though, Steve. Excuse me. With the linebackers and the defensive backs that Highland does have, McGuire and Krasinger in the linebacking core, they are active, they're physical, and they're not afraid to take on anybody. So they fill holes, they're fast. And as far as if Owen Withy would have to try to pass, they've got some pretty sure hands on themselves. I've seen McGuire and Krasinger both pick off passes this year. So you bring up a good point. If Owen Withy has to pass, what are they going to be able to do?
And the other thing also, I think, as you pointed out, is Highland's got tremendous team speed.
Yeah.
And, that becomes an interesting question, too. Is Owen Withy played anybody that's got the team speed that Highland has?
A lot of unknowns when you start getting up that end. We've never seen any of the other teams they've had to play. So, yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how these two kind of start the game and feel each other out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing that's always stood out to me about Highland, especially this year, is just how physical that they are. They are a team that they hit the weight room. Just the way that they look compared to some of the other teams that they played. Like, you can tell they hit the weight room. It takes multiple tacklers to bring ball carriers down. They are not an easy team to contain, and I think that style of play, it's similar to what we say about Six Rivers teams playing in Division 7. That style of football travels well, And if they can go into Stanley Boyd and really force the issue, I think that certainly helps the Highland Cardinals out. Again, we haven't seen Owen Withey, don't know much about them, but I think that brand of football for Highland, now that the weather's colder and those hits start to sting a little bit more, I think that that certainly helps the Cardinals out. Again, it's Highland against Owen Withey from Stanley Boyd High School on Friday night on Extreme 1071 and X1071.com. The winner of that game advances to the 8-player state championship game a week from Saturday against either Northwood Solon Springs or Lena St. Thomas Aquinas from Wisconsin Rapids. And again, if the Cardinals do advance, we will follow them to that 8-player state championship game a week from Saturday. Let's move into 11-player football with Division 7 and Potosi Cassville taking down Cochrane Fountain City 55-0. And Steve, I think that heading into this game, I really very much anticipated that Potosi Cassville had a chip on their shoulder, and boy, did they force the issue in their matchup against CFC on Friday night.
Yeah, and that was, the thing is, and we've said this several times during the broadcast, Cochrane Fountain City probably did have the right seed. They were 8-1. They tied for their part of a three-way tie for first in their conference. So it wasn't like they were playing an inferior team by any stretch of the imagination. But boy, did Potosi Cassville come in and pretty much give them a clinic in Six Rivers football with rushing for over 400 yards as a team. Didn't throw the ball very much, but Dawson Weber had a good game. He had a couple of big pass completions and then ran it in for a touchdown on a broken play at the very end of the first half. And the defense, they gave up 2 or 3 big plays in the game, but after that they said, nope, you're not going to score. And that is about as thorough of a win over a good team that you will ever see in level 2 of the playoffs.
Yeah, Joe Haas rushing 13 attempts for 163 yards and 3 touchdowns. And as you said, Steve, as a team, 40 rushing attempts, 421 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns on the game. I mean, that offensive line has to be, firing on all cylinders and just controlling the line of scrimmage, where you can put 400 yards and 8 touchdowns on one side and then completely shutting out, the opposing team on the other side of the ball as well. And equally impressive feat for another Six Rivers team, River Ridge defeating Bangor 27-0. So yes, both Six Rivers teams go on the road and shut out their opponents. River Ridge getting the 27-0 win over Bangor. I was on the call of that with RJ Osterhaus on Extreme 1071. The weirdest football game I have ever seen in person, where the first half took 34 real-time minutes to complete. The game opened up with a kickoff where the returner accidentally took a knee at their own 8-yard line. So Bangor had the ball back in their own territory at the 8-yard line, ran 19 offensive plays that ran the clock down to 52 minutes remaining in the first quarter, and River Ridge turned them over on downs. And in the first half, based on what RJ's notes were from that game, in the first half, River Ridge ran 9 offensive plays that totaled 4 minutes and 21 seconds of time of possession, and still had Bangor shut out in that first half. And then once River Ridge got the ball to begin the second half, the second play from scrimmage, Ty Adrian goes on a 46-yard touchdown run to open up the scoring, and it was all River Ridge from that point forward. River Ridge, 32 rushing attempts for 237 yards and 4 touchdowns. 4 different ball carriers found the end zone for the Timberwolves, which sets up a monster sectional championship game coming up on Friday night. As I kind of alluded to earlier, level 3 is now known as the sectional championship round, according to the WIA. So the winner will receive a sectional championship plaque. So there is a trophy on the line, so to speak, for the sectional championship round coming up on Friday night. And it will be River Ridge at Potosi Cassville on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Steve, again, Potosi Cassville looking very impressive. River Ridge getting a shutout, and this is one of those rematches that I think River Ridge certainly wanted. They want to get that monkey off their back with those close losses to Potosi Cassville. I am very much looking forward to seeing how this matchup plays out on Friday night.
Yeah, it is their fourth matchup in 2 seasons, which is, demonstrates how good both of those programs are, obviously. And obviously, also, nobody's going to fool anybody. River Ridge knows exactly what Potosi Cassville is going to do, and vice versa. River Ridge's strength, I would say, is the fact that they are, that they got 4 touchdowns from 4 different guys. That has to help. Sometimes in games like this, you know who the big players are going to be, and sometimes it's somebody who you don't necessarily expect that for whatever reason turns out to have a big ball game. And then conversely, also, because these are not 2 teams that throw the ball a huge amount. 421 yards rushing for Potosi Cassville last week. So it might be interesting if the game gets late and the score is, close and all of that, if somebody pulls out something from the back of the playbook to beat the other. There should, by the way, probably be a trophy for the unofficial Six Rivers Conference postseason tournament for whoever ends up playing this game also.
Yeah, this is the second year in a row that Potosi Cassville has had to play both River Ridge and Blackhawk Warren. Of course, last year, Potosi Cassville had to beat River Ridge in level 2 and then fell to Blackhawk Warren in level 3. But Potosi Cassville, the number 1 seed, or not the number 1 seed, but they are undefeated. They should have been the number 1 seed by all accounts. I mean, they were the number 1 team in the state pretty much consistently from start to finish, but let's not revisit that. But Potosi Cassville, I'm very curious to see how Potosi Cassville can respond to playing River Ridge a second time. It should be noted that River Ridge did have some injuries to key players in the first matchup that these two had, and it was a very tight matchup the first go-round, but the team is healthier heading into this matchup. I'm very interested to see how River Ridge and Potosi Cassville matchup head-to-head. I mean, this is a rivalry that extends well beyond football. It's intense in basketball and almost every other sport as well. So again, River Ridge and Potosi Cassville coming up on Friday night on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Other matchups to keep our eye on in Division 7. The winner of that game takes on either Kenosha St. Joseph or Johnson Creek, and the matchups on the other side of the bracket, Spring Valley and against Boyceville, and Edgar versus Lord's Academy. Let's move into Division 6, where another rematch took place. Mark, you and Matthew Gideon were on the call of Lancaster and Cuba City, and Lancaster avenges a loss from week 2 by defeating Cuba City 20-7. Nolan Wolf, who left the game on a stretcher in the level 1 playoff, didn't practice a majority of the week, was on crutches pretty much, leading up to the game against Cuba City. Not only plays, but plays exceptionally well. Cuba City was without Tyson Richard, but when you kind of take a look at this game, Shark, was the absence of Tyson Richard really, kind of the deciding factor, and how did that equate to what Cuba City could or couldn't do as far as moving the ball on the offensive side?
Well, I wouldn't say that Tyson Richards' absence played a huge role in Cuba City's performance, although they only did put up 7 points in the game. But Tyson Richard just adds that little extra vitality, I guess, to your offense because of his ability to pass and spot receivers downfield. And without him, they had to go to their backup quarterback, and that was Hudson Keeler. And he played well, but, he never had his hands on the football at all, hardly. Lancaster defeated Cuba City by using their offense as the defense because in the second half, they embarked on an 18-play drive that took up 12 minutes, make that 11 minutes and 59 seconds, the equivalent of an entire quarter. So once they got their hands on the football, they got the second possession of the second half. They just took over the football and wouldn't let Cuba City have it. And they were also in the lead, 8-7. And they expanded that lead then to 14-7 by getting a touchdown to end that drive. So that was a very beneficial drive for Lancaster in their victory over Cuba City. And again, Cuba City didn't play bad, but they just didn't have the ball. And then when they finally did get the ball after that 11-minute, 59-second drive, well, they turned the ball over just moments later, and that was pretty much all she wrote.
So Lancaster establishing their dominance, being able to move the football and play ball control type of offense to keep that Cuba City offense off the field, and a big reason why Lancaster had success on the offensive side of the ball. Again, Nolan Wolf, 9 of 12 passing, 108 yards and a touchdown, and then had 19 rushing attempts for 63 yards and a rushing touchdown on top of that. The backup quarterback, Hudson Keeler, not a bad day passing the ball, 9 of 15 for 144 yards and 1 interception. But as you said, Shark, it just, just kind of looking at the numbers, not really, seeing the game per se, but it just kind of seemed like that Cuba City that offensive continuity just wasn't there. And, when you have, Andy Leffelholtz, who's out with an injury too, who's been the primary ball carrier this season. We've talked so much this season about how deep Cuba City is and being able to rotate players in and get some of that experience. But when your top 2 guys, especially on the offensive side of the ball, are out, that completely disrupts what you want to do on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it surely did. And then for Lancaster, then just the ball control offense and not letting Cuba City have their hands on the football. Well, that was a big plus. And as far as what Nolan Wolf did, well, he accounted for a total of 171 yards of their offense. And you can see why he is a vital cog of that offense. Oh, yeah, Nolan Henke is big in running the football. And then on occasion, of course, when Lancaster completes a pass, they'll throw one out to Gildersleeve. They'll throw one out to Quentin Plessel. That keeps their offense going. But let's face it, Nolan Wolf is the one who makes that offense tick.
Yeah, and again, we were there for level 1 when Nolan Wolf got hurt and, saw the game, be delayed for almost 20 minutes. I am shocked at the fact that he was able to play, period. The way that the injury looked, when we were there calling the game, I thought his season was done. We didn't really know what, the season had in store, for him, or, if he was going to be, part of the wrestling team and stuff like that during winter sports. So the fact that he's able to go in, play exceptionally well, that is a huge credit to him, and a big reason why Lancaster got the 20-7 win over Cuba City. So Lancaster advances to the Division 6 sectional championship game. They take on Belleville, the 8th seed. Advances again. They defeat Marshall 21-7. Logan Durkee, 22 rushing attempts for 198 yards and 2 touchdowns for Belleville on that game. There were also 3 tacklers on the defensive side that had 10-plus tackles on the game: Trenton Myers, Riker Swenson, and Brennan Keys. How about this Belleville team, Shark, where they began the season 0-5 and then have now won 5 of their last 6? The only loss was the final regular season game against Darlington, who, again, Darlington coming off that loss to Cuba City. That was kind of a get-right game for them. But, the Belleville Wildcats coming out of nowhere, we thought when they were at 0-5, their season was pretty much done. Sneak their way into the postseason, have a run, and have an opportunity to bring home some sectional championship hardware.
I'm kind of wondering if they did have a win among the first 6 games, but that was a 2-0 forfeit win over Abundant Life, St. Ambrose. So they didn't play, but, the very fact that they got one in the win column there, Tyler, I kind of tend to think that kind of resuscitated them just a bit, thinking, okay, we have a win, and we're going to use that win to try to get better. And they went out and lost to Mineral Point the next week, 27-9. But since that time, they've only lost 1 game. So, yeah, they are truly an in-season Cinderella story, starting out as poorly as they did, and now they find themselves in a level 3 playoff game.
Yeah, who would have ever – think about this. If you'd made a bet that the only team from the SWAL remaining in the third round of the playoffs was going to be Belleville, you would have made a ton of money, although everybody would have thought you'd lost your mind. And this also, I think, is a point for me in the sense that, typically there are pretty bad first-round blowouts with higher ranked teams or higher seeded teams over lower seeded teams. And we talked all about, how unique the seeding process was. But there have been for a few years people saying that, well, there are too many teams in the football playoffs, even though football is the only WIA sport where not everybody gets in. With teams moving from 11 player to 8 player, there are fewer 11 player teams. Your chances are better to get in. And, if you were to cut a round off the playoffs, this story wouldn't be taking place because Belleville wouldn't have made the playoffs. So I think that people ought to remember that the next time they say, well, there's too many teams in the football playoffs. And not really.
Well, also keep in mind, too, that forfeit win against Abundant Life St. Ambrose, that does count as a conference win. They don't have that win. They're not in the postseason. There's no way that they're in. So that forfeit win, granted the replacement game that they had, I believe, was against Lake Mills. They lost, that game head to head. So when you look at the record, as far as on field, they began the season 0-5. And, give a ton of credit to Coach Nolden for being able to stay the course and, keep that team in it. They had some very winnable games in the back half of their season. And, because of the strength of the Swall, they sneak in as an 8 seed. You can, make the argument that, say what you will about the seeding. Belleville probably an 8 seed just because of the record and the resume and things like that. But, when you get hot at the right time and everything starts clicking, and again, I don't know what the full context is for Belleville. Maybe there were injuries to begin the season and then players got healthy as the season went along and players were, introduced back or, position changes and stuff like that happened. But give a ton of credit to both of these coaches that are going to be competing on Friday night. Jordan Rolland having to be, adaptive with his team, with the injuries and things that, came with the Lancaster side, modifying the offense so that, the best players had the best opportunity for success. And then for Coach Nolden, getting Belleville from an 0-5 start to, winning 5 of their last 6 and an opportunity to bring home a sectional championship. My goodness, I'm very intrigued by this matchup on Friday night. Shark and I will be on the call of that on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Again, that's a Division 6 sectional championship game. The winner of that game takes on either Cedar Grove, Belgium, or Lamira. And the other matchups on the other side of the bracket, Eau Claire Regis against Grantsburg and Bondwell versus Coleman. And of course, if Lancaster does advance, we will follow them to level 4 on 97.7 Country WGLR. Let's move into Division 5. Prairie du Chien, the 1 seed, and a very impressive 1 seed at that, get a shutout victory over Brookfield Academy, 56-0. And the Milwaukee Academy of Science defeat the Darlington Redbirds in a close one, 36-35. It should be noted that the loss for Darlington, what that means for them next year is that they do move back into Division 6. So the performance factor no longer a factor for Darlington next year, but the Milwaukee Academy of Science will now head to Prairie du Chien for the Division 5 sectional championship game. The winner of that game will take on either Stratford or Lake Country Lutheran. Other matchups on the other side of the bracket, St. Croix Falls versus Northwestern and Wrightstown against Kiel. So we'll keep tabs on Prairie du Chien as they make their journey through the Division 5 bracket. And now we get a first on the high school football roundup for this season. Let's talk Illinois postseason football as the Galena Pirates defeated Stark County in the first round 43-42, which sets up a matchup coming up on Saturday that we will have on Super Hits 106 as they take on Ottawa in a second round matchup in Galena. Steve, you will be on the call of that one. Kind of talk a little bit about this Galena Pirates football team that, very tight win against Stark County last week. What do you make of the matchup and what should we look for on Saturday?
Well, we'll start obviously with the fact that Galena was seeded 12th. And therefore, you don't expect much out of a 12 seed. They made the playoffs. You figure that's a pretty good season. It was a 1-score game at the half. Stark County returned the opening kickoff of the second half for a touchdown. And so Galena was down 2 scores 3 times in the second half. They got, I believe, a 60-something yard touchdown pass to get back into the game. They got an advantage of kicking an extra point and deciding to go for two after Stark County was nailed for an offside penalty. Obviously, it's half the distance. They went for two and got it. That made it a one-score game at that point. Stark County scored again to make it, I believe, 42-28. But again, Galena scored to cut it down to 42-35. And then executed, that was with about 3.5 minutes left. Then they executed an onside kick, got it back, and ended up going in for the go-ahead score, touchdown and 2-point conversion with about 90 seconds left. They also managed to withstand a third down pass to the goal line that was incomplete. It was apparently the Stark County fans thought pass interference should be called, but it wasn't. And so Galena comes up with a win. They're taking on a team in Marquette from Ottawa that had its own Cinderella moment, just made the playoffs. And they're in a conference apparently where you end up playing teams twice in a couple of instances. They only played 5 conference games from what I've seen and taking a look at the information online. But they were a 13 seed and they beat a number 4 seed. So I think probably the last people on earth who thought that they would be hosting a playoff game was Galena, but there they are on Saturday. And the other kind of trivia about this is that this is going to be most likely the last football game that is played at Galena High School, because the current football field is going to be torn up as part of their school expansion project. So they're going to be doing all their games on the road next season, but they're going to be playing one more home game Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, but again, that game against Ottawa on Super Hits 106 at 1 o'clock, and the winner of that game takes on either Rockford Lutheran or Leroy, or is it Leroy? I'm not sure.
We'll find out by Saturday.
Yeah, we'll find out for sure. But again, yeah, Galena Pirates football coming up on Saturday on Super Hits 106. That wraps up our recaps and previews for this week. Let's move into our teams of the week. I'm going to go both Potosi-Cassville and River Ridge, just because both Six Rivers teams had to go on the road, made impressive shutout victories, and setting up a monster matchup and a rematch among Six Rivers rivals coming up on Friday night. So those two teams are my co-teams of the week. Steve, then Gary, then Shark, your teams of the week.
Mine is Potosi-Cassville, barely over River Ridge, because Potosi-Cassville, I think, had perhaps a tougher opponent, because Bangor did not deserve the number 1 seed, as we all know. Very solid performance, obviously, by the Timberwolves. But Potosi-Cassville, I mean, they look like they were a bunch of bulldozers, basically. Anytime that you can get 421 yards of rushing against an 8-1 team, and I can't remember what the number for rushing was for Cochran Fountain City, but it was in like the 20s, I believe, in the first 3 quarters. And so just a tremendously, put it this way, it was a performance you would expect a number 1 seeded team to make, even though they weren't.
On the road, no less, too. So,
yes.
Gary, your team of the week.
Well, I could easily go with Potosi-Cassville and River Ridge. Excuse me. I'm going to go with River Ridge, however. You talked earlier, Tyler, about Potosi-Cassville having a chip going up to CFC. I think River Ridge has probably got that big a chip, maybe even bigger, because of how they played both Blackhawk and Potosi-Cassville this year. Didn't get a lot of respect, I don't think. And granted, whether Bangor deserved number 1 or not, they were number 1. And I think River Ridge did an outstanding job taking them down like they did. So, be it what it was, I think River Ridge put on a good presentation for themselves.
All right, I like it. Shark, your team of the week.
I have to go with the Lancaster Flying Arrows for that 20-7 win over Cuba City. Take a look at this timeline, guys, all right? The week before, on Friday, here's Nolan Wolf rolling out to his right toward the sideline, and a player from Westby Cole cocks him from behind, and he goes flying, and he's down, and the game is stopped for roughly 20 minutes to get out a stretcher and tend to him. We think it's a very serious lower body injury, possibly a leg injury, and he's carted off the field on a stretcher, and we're thinking we have seen the last of Nolan Wolf for the 2024 season. But he recovers in time to play on Friday, and he played a great game in leading his team to a 20-7 win, but it was in the way that they won that football game, thanks to their offense being their defense. Their offense, that is, kept the football away from Cuba City and had that huge 18-play drive that took up 11 minutes and 59 seconds, and then a turnover on the part of Cuba City seals the win, and it's a 20-7 victory for the Lancaster Flying Arrows. Just absolutely very impressive, and especially when you look at that timeline where it looked like they might not have Nolan Wolf, and instead they do have Nolan Wolf, and he plays great in the win.
Yep, I like it, and that leads into our players of the week, and I'm piggybacking off of that, Shark, because I think Nolan Wolf certainly a player of the week with the circumstances that you just outlined. You know, it's one thing to come back from an injury; it's another to play exceptionally well in a postseason game and a must-win game to keep your season alive. And seeing the stat line and hearing about his performance, that to me stands out as a player of the week nominee. Steve, your player of the week.
Well, I'm going to name the Potosi-Cassville offensive line as my players of the week because 421 yards rushing. And they were, I mean, it's not merely a case of, 421 yards rushing, 8 rushing touchdowns. But when you keep getting smacked like that, it tends to dispirit the opposition because, they're looking at the clock, they're getting pushed backwards, they're running out of time. I mean, think about this. Potosi-Cassville averaged 10 yards plus a carry. So basically, give the ball to Haas or to Isaiah Groom or to River Saul, automatic first down. I mean, that's right. Again, against an 8-1 team that was legitimately the number 2 seed in that bracket. So my offensive line, or their offensive line, gets the award, Potosi-Cassville.
Potosi-Cassville truther buying into the offensive line. I like it. Gary, your player of the week.
Well, I was going to go with a couple of Cole players, Wes Kreisinger and Jackson McGuire, linebackers for the Highland Cardinals, 16 and 15 total tackles, respectively. Maybe more so McGuire, because on top of that, he put up another 76 yards rushing. And when it came down to crunch time at the end of the game, McGuire was getting the ball, running it into the line, burning up time. But Kreisinger was just as equally important, picking up the 2 touchdown passes from Bennett Smith. So I'm going to go with a couple of Cole players, Wes Kreisinger and Jackson McGuire.
All right, I like it. Shark, anyone else besides Nolan Wolf for player of the week?
Not really offhand, although once again, Devin Clark played a nice game for the Lancaster Flying Arrows. He made his usual bundle of tackles, plus he caught a touchdown pass. It was on the first touchdown by the Lancaster Flying Arrows. It was scored by Clark, and from that point on, the Arrows turned an 8-0 lead into a 20-7 win overall.
Yeah, it's been really cool seeing Devin Clark get inserted onto the offensive side of the ball and being able to contribute with some touchdown catches for the Flying Arrows. So those are our players of the week, and that wraps up this week's episode of the Papa Murphys of Platteville and Prairie du Chien High School Football Roundup. Just to recap our schedule for Friday night, we have Potosi-Cassville hosting River Ridge on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. We also have Lancaster hosting Belleville on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel in Division 6. 8-player state semifinal between Highland and Owen Withee on Extreme 107.1 and X1071.com. And then on Saturday, IHSA second round playoff action with Galena taking on Ottawa Marquette. Again, 1 o'clock on Saturday on Super Hits 106. For Steve Prestegard, Gary Craugh, and Mark Evenstad, I'm Tyler Diktanas. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week for another postseason episode of the Papa Murphys of Platteville and Prairie du Chien High School Football Roundup on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel.